Hello everyone to the third and final part of my mini-series on the unknown inclusions for Jurassic World Evolution, where we look at aspects of the game we have yet to hear being implemented, but which I believe will be very important in making this game successful. As a recap of the series, in the first video I worried about Jurassic World Evolution not incorporating modding into their game, as they have permitted with their game Planet Coaster. Modding in Jurassic World Evolution should include changing the colors, if not the actual models of the in-game entities themselves, and I believe this will help to extend the game's lifespan and solidify its reputation, just like it did for previous Tycoon games like the Zoo Tycoon series and J-Pug. In the second video, I worried about Jurassic World Evolution incorporating speculative or inaccurate aspects about dinosaurs into their game, and I particularly scrutinized Deinonychus and its inherent problems. In the end, I conceded that while I might not be too opposed to speculative soft tissue structures like rooster combs or turkey wattles on a dinosaur like Deinonychus, Jurassic World Evolution should really exceed people's expectations by making sure their dinosaurs are accurate either to the Jurassic Park lore or to real-life paleontology, as they did with Ceratosaurus and Edmontosaurus in the gameplay trailer that was released back in 2017. Now we are here to learn about the third aspect that I worry won't be implemented into Jurassic World Evolution. For this video, you are permitted to comment down below in the comments section. For those of you that don't know, the first and second parts of this mini-series had the comments section disabled so that I could funnel comments here to this video. I thought this would be a better way to keep track of and engage with my audience, although please kindly let me know if this system was too troublesome or not. Also, although I would advise you to watch my previous videos of the mini-series as well as this one, this is not a requirement. If you don't want to go back to the previous video, or if you came from those videos and don't want to watch this video here, then you have every right to do so. So, let's get to the final part of my mini-series on the things I worry for Jurassic World implementing, or in this case, something they might not implement. The third thing that we still have no idea about for whether or not they will be included are the pterosaurs and aquatic creatures like Mosasaurus. I harped about this issue before in a previous video where I asserted that the developers do not have enough time left to implement these creatures. But how do I have any right to say these things? How do I know that pterosaurs and aquatic creatures will be too difficult to implement? I'm just a stupid guy giving an unverified opinion, right? Well, I guess that's the point. I am a stupid guy giving an unverified opinion. But the key thing that I hold on to is that I probably represent a fair portion of Jurassic World Evolution's customer base right now. My stupidity, or at least my ignorance of game development, is preventing me from fully committing to endorsing the game, and I feel like Frontier Developments needs to be upfront about answering some of my concerns because they are concerns for others in the Jurassic World Evolution community as well. In this case, is Frontier Developments going to be able to implement pterosaurs and aquatic creatures like Mosasaurus for the game? Alright, so what gives? What objections of mine, real or fictional, do I have about the implementation of pterosaurs and aquatics in Jurassic World Evolution? First, I worry about the ability of the developers to rig the models for pterosaurs and aquatics. To summarize the concept of in-game models, based on my current understanding, models that move have a certain skeletal structure beneath their models. This helps models move a certain way, usually in conjunction with other parts of the body. Developers often save time by using the same rigging for other in-game entities as well. For instance, let's look at Jurassic World Evolution's Velociraptor. From my understanding, Velociraptor's skeletal model beneath its skin would look something like this. And so the developers are animating it to allow it to run, walk, look around, and do other behaviors. By getting the rigging and animations right, the developers can then wrap a skin around the skeleton. For example, both Velociraptor and Deinonychus appear to move the same way based on the trailers we've seen, and so I suspect they are using the same rigging, but have different skins wrapped around them, obviously. Nick Rogers, the head of animation for Jurassic World Evolution, in an interview with YouTuber The Gaming Beaver, whose link you will find in the description, talked about how certain hadrosaurs will probably share the same animations as well. I'll probably go more in depth on the subject of rigging for Jurassic World Evolution in another video, but for now, let's get back to how rigging affects the likes of pterosaurs and Mosasaurus. Now, compared to a dinosaur, it's obvious that these creatures have a different skeletal structure from them. For instance, this pteranodon, assuming it made it into the game, would have a rigging something like this. From here, the developers would need to implement special animations that would allow it to function and behave a certain way. From the previews I've seen, the dinosaurs all seem capable of performing at least 11 unique animations. Eating, drinking, sleeping, walking, running, fighting or defending, communicating, sniffing or sitting in an idle animation, sitting down, standing up, and stopping in their tracks after running. On top of these, in the Gaming Beaver's interview with Nick Rogers, the latter described numerous randomized animation sequences like hand and eye twitching as well as foot balance for dinosaur models walking on hilly terrain. Pterosaurs and aquatics would need to have their own equivalent animations, although I can imagine it being much more different to animate their riggings due to their unique anatomy. And of course, we would need to consider the time and effort required to make the skins that would be wrapped around their rigging. Despite these issues, I actually consider them to be far easier to deal with compared to the next great challenge: collision detection. Collision detection in a video game is basically the ability of two given assets to be able to detect and blunt the ability of one another to intersect each other. Without it, objects go right through each other, and with it, objects mold around, bounce off, or basically get blocked by one another. I think this is one of the most common in-game glitches one can experience in any given video game, and you can even see it in the first gameplay trailer for Jurassic World Evolution, released in October of 2017, when two Parasaurolophus basically walk through each other on the left-hand side of the screen. To be clear, I'm not mad that this is happening. Objects going through one another is such a common occurrence, players should expect to live with at least a handful of these instances, and that's something I've come to accept. However, flying and aquatic entities face some of the biggest challenges regarding collision because they are not restricted to a single geometric plane like a normal dinosaur would walk on. Instead, they fly through mediums that permit them access to a much larger three-dimensional space. In the case of pterosaurs, they have access to three-dimensional space in the form of the sky, while aquatic creatures like mosasaurs have access to three-dimensional space in the form of the body of water they find themselves in. In a perfect world, in-game pterosaurs and aquatics would be able to use almost all of the space in their respective habitats that is not occupied by an already present physical object like a tree or a rock. However, while it might be easier to predict the ability of collision detection with an object that is restricted to a single geometric plane, such as a dinosaur, pterosaurs and aquatics don't follow this rule, as I will demonstrate in a moment. So, here we have a schematic that represents my views of how collision will work in Jurassic World Evolution. As a disclaimer, I am not a game developer, and so I cannot confirm whether or not these are actual challenges that game developers actually deal with or not, but I'm open to constructive dialogue. At the very least, I like to think that this represents a layman's interpretation of this concept that is also held by many others. Anyway, in the schematic I made, we have an orange object, which represents the exposed surface area of a rock, a building, a tree, or whatever. The picture on the top is a side view of the object, and the picture on the bottom is a bird's eye view of it. The green represents the plane that entities will walk upon. Put more simply, the green is the ground or the grass. Dinosaurs in Jurassic World Evolution cannot fly or swim, and so the red you see represents everywhere that a given dinosaur can interact with, and it assumes in the case of the orange object that there are no animations that allow for the dinosaur to climb up on it. The red represents the area that the developers must consider when dealing with collision of an object. But now let's look at an in-game model that is not restricted to just the green plane of existence, namely a pterosaur. Now see all the red that this object can access? In a three-dimensional space, this pterosaur can now interact with most of the object's surface area that is above the green plane, including on top of it, along the sides of it, basically everywhere. Now let's look at an example for an aquatic creature. In this schematic, we have a blue body of water that a game asset like a mosasaurus can access in its entirety. The green represents the geometric plane again. However, in this case, it becomes an obstacle to avoid colliding with, represented by the red color. It's tricky for me to assess the relationship between the break between the water and the surface, where the lighter red is, because while we can't let the mosasaurus swim out into the sky, we can't let it stay stuck beneath the surface since it's an air-breathing creature, and especially if we want it to breach like this. Admittedly, I think I have a harder time understanding collision in an aquatic setting than I do in an aerial setting, so maybe I'm not describing this problem accurately. But again, we're dealing with something more complex than a dinosaur restricted to a single geometric plane to walk on. Deep water also becomes an additional hassle for land-dwelling creatures because they can't swim like a mosasaurus can. Therefore, the developers need to deal with the issue of each dinosaur being able to react to being found in deep water by making additional animations for each dinosaur rig in order for them to swim. Basically, it means more work for the developers. I think the effort to implement a system of collision detection in such dynamic creatures as pterosaurs and aquatic creatures is just too much for what the developers of Jurassic World Evolution can do. I say this because these creatures are also too much for the developers of many Animal Tycoon games in years past. The developers of JPOG tried to incorporate flying and swimming creatures into their game, but they ran out of time. The base game of Zoo Tycoon 1 was unable to incorporate flying creatures as placeable entities, but they did manage to include swimming creatures in the Marine Mania edition. Zoo Tycoon 2 represents the Tycoon game that really got the furthest in terms of adding both flying and swimming creatures that could account for collision. On one hand, the ability of their flyers to fly is admittedly pathetic. Peacocks and flamingos are among those animals in the base game that can fly, but they either follow a set animation to fly, such as into a tree, or when they fly no higher than midway up their cages. There's never really any danger of them flying up and out of their zoo. On the other hand, Zoo Tycoon 2 did an amazing job dealing with their swimming creatures. Not only can swimming creatures be put into tanks and be able to swim up and down its length, width, and depth without much collision with the walls, they can also be put into bodies of water created by the water editor and allowed to swim and account for collisions there too. As for Zoo Tycoon 3, some animals can actually fly like hawks, parrots, and cockatoos, but I don't really count them because these creatures follow a set animation that loops after a few minutes. They can't really do their own thing like the animals in Zoo Tycoon 2 can. So let's consider the Tycoon games I've mentioned and discuss how they might apply to Jurassic World Evolution. Jurassic World Evolution is actually in a much more challenging position because it intends to port its games to console, specifically the PS4 and Xbox One. Logically, the base game for both PC and console should play relatively the same, and so one or the other shouldn't have an unfair advantage by having a feature of the game that only works for one platform over another, such as one having flying and aquatic creatures while the other has none. This situation puts Jurassic World Evolution's development team in the same boat as JPOG's developers, who probably couldn't get flying and aquatic creatures to work, at least partly because they needed to be accounted for on both the PC and consoles. Basically, how is Jurassic World Evolution going to create a game that deals with flying and swimming creatures and their issues of collision on 3 different gaming platforms? They could go the route of Zoo Tycoon 3, where pterosaurs and swimming creatures follow a set animation that loops every 5 minutes or so. However, I feel like this would be an immense shame to simply place down a building, such as a mosasaur lagoon or a pterosaur aviary, where the mosasaurs and pterosaurs respectively move around, yet repeat the same animations every few minutes or so. There would be no dynamic situations where they might react to a dinosaur breakout or breach in their containment. After all, one of the most dramatic moments in Jurassic World the film was when the pterosaurs broke out, tore through Main Street, and the mosasaurus managed to join the fray. I don't think we would ever see that in Jurassic World Evolution if they go the route of Zoo Tycoon 3, and that would really be sad. So then perhaps Jurassic World Evolution could go the way of Zoo Tycoon 2 in their incorporation of flyers and swimmers, right? Well, yes and no. I definitely believe Jurassic World Evolution can take its cues from Zoo Tycoon 2 for their aquatic animals and make it so that the mosasaurus, for instance, can be placed into a tank or a custom-made body of water using the paint editor and allowed to swim freely. Regardless of whether we make a body of water that's an S-shape, like a river, or just a simple circle, I hope Jurassic World Evolution does look into implementing a system of collision that allows mosasaurs to swim freely wherever it wants in whatever haphazard fashion it wishes. But pterosaurs are much more difficult to handle in my opinion because they are expected to fly through the sky high above the trees and earth below. We don't want to see Dimorphodon and Pteranodon fly only a few feet off the ground like a Zoo Tycoon 2 peacock or flamingo, yet we can't have a system where a simple electric fence with no roof over its head can keep them in. That would stretch credibility, and that would be a little too much to handle in my opinion. Obviously, pterosaurs would need their own special exhibit to be placed in, and Jurassic World the film provided that in the form of the Pterosaur Aviary, a massive glass dome that was dramatically broken into thanks to the Indominus Rex. Once again, the overwhelming influence of collision compels us to look at this issue realistically. Let's look at the schematic for flying creatures again that I showed earlier, but this time we now have to deal with a dome-like structure that prevents movement through it. As we see here, the red represents the area that pterosaurs must be accounted for in terms of their ability to collide with it. There is much more red in this picture than there was in the last picture I showed, and the developers would need to deal with this in order to successfully implement pterosaurs. But how would the aviary work? Could its size be changed to be made bigger or smaller? Would there need to be a minimum size for the aviary to function? Maybe we would only have one building type to implement. I think any of these options would be preferable for Jurassic World Evolution's developers, and I would be happy if any of the options I mentioned were implemented. But here's the catch. Let the pterosaurs do their own thing. What I mean is that the pterosaurs should be allowed to randomly walk, fly, and interact anywhere within their aviary without following a set sequence of animations. Rather than have an animation where a pterosaur flies and repeats the same animation over and over again, it should be able to do whatever it wants. This is important because if I wanted to allow a Tyrannosaurus or an Indominus Rex to break into the cage and leave a gaping hole in the aviary, I want my pterosaurs to go wherever they please. Do they want to fly to my herbivorous dinosaurs and eat them? Go ahead. They want to fly and carry away some of my tourists? Go ahead. They want to aimlessly fly through the sky free as a bird? Go ahead. I want the pterosaurs to fly anywhere they want to all over my island if they get implemented. I would definitely forgive the developers if they ignored pterosaurs' ability to fly off the map like a seagull, because I would much rather have pterosaurs fly freely through the park and truly embody pterosaurs as they are represented by the Jurassic Park franchise as a whole. It would definitely be amazing to recreate the chaos that occurred on Main Street involving the pterosaurs, and then create a situation where my park is in ruins, but my Tyrannosaurus gets to roar over my island as pterosaurs flit freely about in all their majestic glory. What a sight that would be! But, as is the realist way, I don't think I'll ever get to see this glorious sight in Jurassic World Evolution. It's sad because pterosaurs and aquatic creatures, two of the big things that I argue could lead to Jurassic World Evolution's immortalization and infamy, hangs in the balance until the summer of this year in 2018. Now, I've been reminded that being a pessimist makes me seem like such an unreasonably glum person. Why should I be so negative about the implementation of pterosaurs and mosasaurus? To be clear, I'm not saying that I don't want them to be implemented. If I could wish for anything to come true for Jurassic World Evolution, I would absolutely want to have free-ranging flying and swimming creatures to be implemented. But there are certain challenges that I think we need to critically accept as being potentially fatal in the inclusion of these creatures. Although I have no game development experience and have no idea what Frontier Developments is capable of, I represent a layman who is considering the possible challenges that could get in the way of the development team. But make no mistake, I will be the first person to admit my naivety if they manage to include flying and swimming creatures. I will even make a video that showcases these creatures and directly apologizes to Frontier Developments for stupidly doubting their capabilities. Furthermore, if pterosaurs and aquatic creatures will still be implemented as DLC, I will still wholeheartedly apologize to Frontier Developments. I badly want Frontier Developments to prove me wrong, because if they do, then I believe that means Jurassic World Evolution's future is secured. I want to be one of those people that believe that flying and swimming creatures will come to Jurassic World Evolution, but until I see them, I'm going to assume their good is missing. But please, Frontier Developments, prove me wrong. So, we have come to the end of another video and the end of my mini-series. Again, I sincerely want to thank those that stuck around for the video's length, and I hope that I gave an informative discussion. I'm especially grateful if you watched my previous videos and got the full experience out of my mini-series, even if it was a bit boring to watch. Modding, accurate dinosaurs, and both flying and aquatic creatures with proper collision detection are the minimum requirements I feel will help to improve this game, extend its lifespan long into the future, and bring players, both old and new, back to play it. I think the implementation of my 3 suggestions will also help to bolster Frontier Development's reputation as a game designer, and I think this might go a long way in terms of monetary value for the company and it being enlisted to make other video games as well. Just a thought. Anyway, for those of you watching, if you have any thoughts as to what else Jurassic World Evolution should add that I didn't mention, please let me know in the comments section. I would even appreciate any facts on how game design works and how easy or difficult it would be to account for the issues I mentioned in this video and my previous ones. Is it easier or harder than I make it out to be? I hope it's the former. Anyway, thanks again guys, Leo Venator signing out, and I wish you all well.